This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The World Health Organization sounds its loudest alarm over Ebola in the DRC, but what does this mean? We tell you more. The army and protest leaders to meet for talks on power sharing deal. And in Libya, calls for immediate ceasefire mount. This is Africa Live. A very warm welcome. I am Peninah Karibe. Let's have a look at the stories lined up this hour. Egypt rakes in $83 million so far for hosting the Africa Cup of Nations. And the wait is over for Senegal and Algeria ahead of the final of the Africa Cup of Nations in Cairo. The World Health Organization says a fishmonger who died on Monday in the Democratic Republic of Congo may have crossed into Rwanda. The woman is said to have vomited multiple times at a market in Uganda on July 11th before dying of Ebola in the DRC. The case has raised concerns in Uganda and Rwanda, which has never had a recorded case of Ebola. When declaring the outbreak as a public health emergency of international concern, WHO said neighboring countries of Rwanda, South Sudan, Burundi and Uganda are the most at risk, while the Central African Republic, Angola, Tanzania, Republic of Congo and Zambia are in a second tier. Up to 1,600 people have died, 2,500 infected and another 160,000 vaccinated against the virus. CGTN's Daniela Pearson reports.
The youngest suspected victim of Ebola is being laid to rest in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Newborn baby Masika Mathe is the latest casualty. The fate of her mother is unknown. Her family has not been allowed to give her a traditional funeral as a safety precaution.
Families are losing their loved ones, and in our culture, people will come and see you and give you messages of compassion, but that isn't possible today.
We're careful because every dead body is suspected of carrying Ebola. The virus is so dangerous that if we touched it without protection, we risk losing our lives.
The UN warns that the epidemic is infecting more children than in earlier outbreaks.
Just allowing somebody else to handle that body is a leap culturally. Yeah. But that has to be overcome, even if it is an enormous change. And where we have seen the communities taking charge, it begins to change. And
has that happened here? Has that happened
in some places, yes. In some places, yes.
More than 160,000 people have been vaccinated in the affected provinces of Ituri and North Kivu. So far, responders have been using a ring vaccination strategy, which focuses on protecting the immediate circle of people who have been in contact with Ebola patients. But this may not be enough, with cases now being identified in neighboring Uganda and near the Rwandan border. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Still in the DRC, it's been almost a year since Ebola has been detected in what are now the outbreak epicenters of North Kivu and Ituri province. The World Health Organization on Wednesday declared the virus a public health emergency of international concern. This is the highest level of alarm that the WHO can sound, and it's only the 5th time that it has been declared in the history of the organization. CGTN's Robert Nagila has more.
1,600 dead. More than 2,500 infected. The current Ebola outbreak is the second largest in history, following the 2014 outbreak in West Africa.
They need the support of the international community.
It's taken almost a year for the number of cases to reach 1,000, but just 71 days to reach 2,000 cases. An indication of just how rapidly the virus is spreading in the DR Congo. Now, the World Health Organization says Ebola is a public health emergency of international concern after a new case was recorded in the city of Goma in eastern DRC, home to more than 2 million people. This now means more resources to fight Ebola, but neighboring countries' borders will remain open. The WHO says risk of the disease spreading outside the region is low and has declined to issue travel or trade restrictions. Outside the immediate region, there will be no entry screening of passengers at ports or airports.
Now is the time for the international community to stand in solidarity with the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo, not to impose punitive and counterproductive restrictions that will only serve to isolate them.
Since January, there have been close to 200 attacks against health workers or Ebola treatment facilities. At least 7 people have died and close to 60 injured. As a result, mistrust of health workers has also been a major factor, with many people refusing to seek medical treatment. A significant number of cases have also surprised health workers, as those affected have not come into contact with known Ebola cases. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
And for more on this, we're now joined live from Kinshasa by CGTN's Chris Ochamringa. Chris, can you tell us more on the reactions from there over this latest declaration?
Well, the DRC government has accepted the declaration by the World Health Organization, although they have said that they are very worried that countries neighboring the DRC may decide to impose trade and travel restrictions, and so they urge them against taking that decision, which would be counterproductive, they say, and also negatively affect the lives of so many people who rely on cross-border trade for their survival. Now, the DRC Minister of Health was in Goma yesterday, where they have set up quite a number of vaccination centers. They have set up health checks right from North Kivu, because there are very many people who travel from the Ebola hotspots of Beni Butembo to Goma to do trade with the neighboring countries. And so there are a number of health checks where they're surveilling, carrying out screening to check that people who travel this side are not infected with Ebola. And the government has already said that they're considering taking measures against some irresponsible behavior of people who contract the disease and get a fever, but then decide to travel to other areas spreading the disease. That is something that they're still talking in the DRC government currently.
Okay, so let's talk more about that screening process that you touched on there. There is reports that the military is being used to enforce that process as well as the vaccination process. Has this begun already?
Well, it has begun, especially in North Kivu area. There have been so many attacks on health workers and facilities, about 198 that the World Health Organization has recorded so far. So the decision was made to make the DRC Army and UN peacekeepers work very closely with health workers going to carry out this vaccination exercise. So the military is helping them. They have been doing this. When they go out to do the outreach programs, they always escort the health teams to ensure that they are not attacked by rebels. That area has about 50 armed groups operating there, and so it's for the safety of both the health workers and the patients in that part of the DRC.
All right, Chris, thank you for that update. Chris Ochamringa live in Kinshasa. Now, let's head to Libya. The United Nations has expressed concerns over the rise in the number of people being displaced by the ongoing conflict in the country. The UNHCR says at least 120,000 people have been displaced in less than 4 months, just when the battle for Tripoli began. Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar has been leading the campaign. He hopes it will see him take over the capital from the UN-backed government. More than 1,000 people have so far been killed. The conflict has attracted wide international condemnation. On Tuesday, the US, France, Britain, the UAE, Italy and Egypt called for an immediate end to the hostilities. For more on this, we're joined by the Executive Director of Afro-Middle East Center, Naeem Jina, the research institute dedicated to studying the Middle East and North African relations between the region and the African continent. Naeem, thank you very much for joining us. We are finally seeing the international community engaging and trying to resolve this. Why has it taken this long?
Well, firstly, the agreement signed on Tuesday is not really a big deal. In terms of its effect on the ground and in terms of its of the possibility of ending the kind of stalemate that exists politically in Libya. In fact, the UAE and Egypt and Saudi Arabia in particular have been calling for such an agreement for weeks now. And that's because what the agreement does is that it entrenches the position of Khalifa Haftar around Tripoli and essentially kind of continues the kind of soft siege of Tripoli, even though it ends the violence for now. So it doesn't really make too much of a difference. What people in Tripoli have been calling for was an agreement that will cause Haftar to move his troops back to the 4th of April before he advanced on Tripoli, and that's not going to happen. So really, while we might have an agreement signed by 6 states, the international community is not doing, it's not an indication that the international community is doing much to fix the situation in Libya.
Okay, so let's focus on these 6 countries. Do you trust their intentions, given that they all have different vested interests in Libya?
No, absolutely not. I mean, all of those 6 countries and others beyond those, and with the others I would include Saudi Arabia, for example, Russia as another example, Turkey, Qatar. All of them, the involvement in Libya is to a large extent because of their own interests and what they believe they can get out of Libya and out of the Libyan state. Whether it's in terms of Libyan resources or whether it's in terms of getting Libyans to prevent the migration of Africans into Europe, whatever the case might be, all of these actors are involved because they think they have something to gain, not because they want to fix the civil war in Libya, not because they want to end the loss of life and end the violence and actually see a democracy in Libya. That's not the issue. Many of the countries of those 6, for example, that have signed that support Khalifa Haftar, and Khalifa Haftar is not really interested in democracy, for example. He wants to be the strong man, the new strongman dictator of Libya, and that's what some of these countries want.
And the UNHCR has voiced its concerns over the rise in the number of the internally displaced persons. What more can be done to protect civilians?
You know, unfortunately, there isn't much that can be done in the short term. You know, we could say, for example, that the arms embargo must be more strongly, stringently implemented. We can say that, but it's not really going to happen. We can call, for example, for the war not to happen with, for people not to be bombed from the air. Again, we can call for it, it's not going to happen. The only way that we're going to end the displacement of people is a long-term solution, which is a political solution that will solve the civil war and solve the political problem of more than two governments in Libya. In the short term, unfortunately, I think that this is the reality we're going to have to live with as long as such a political solution is not found.
All right, Naeem, we appreciate those insights. Thank you for joining us. Naeem Gina live in Johannesburg. In Morocco, a court has sentenced 3 ISIL supporters to death for killing 2 Scandinavian hikers. The verdicts for Abdessamad Ajoud, Younes Waziyad and Rashid Afati follow petitions on social media calling for their execution. The 3 admitted to killing the 2 women, 24-year-old Louisa Vesteraga Jespersen from Denmark and 28-year-old Norwegian Maren Øland. The 2 were found beheaded in the High Atlas Mountains back in December.
If the executions go ahead, they will be the first in Morocco since 1993. It's a fact-based verdict based on Moroccan and international law. It is consistent and it satisfies us 100% regarding public action.
You're watching Africa Live. We're taking a quick break. Straight ahead. South African military start patrolling Cape Town to counter a surge in gang violence. And US claims it shot down an Iranian drone. Iran's military denies losing any drone.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Peninah Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Just days after protest leaders and Sudan's ruling generals agreed to a power-sharing deal or on a power-sharing deal, they are set to meet again today for talks on key remaining issues. The two sides signed an accord on Wednesday to form a joint ruling body tasked with creating a transitional civilian administration that would govern for just over 3 years. Meantime, thousands of Sudanese protesters have been marching through the streets Thursday to condemn the deadly crackdown by security forces last month.
A symbolic move that left some in tears, as thousands of demonstrators, mostly teenagers and others in their early 20s, rallied in the square which they said they would rename Freedom Square in memory of those who lost their lives in the demonstrations.
We are here to show people that we didn't forget those who died. All these marches show that those who were killed are symbols of giving, and they will forever be in our thoughts.
This was a key location for Bashir and his allies during rallies. Now young men raised a banner calling for justice first and loyalty to the revolution's martyrs.
As for the military council, I ask them to establish a civilian state, to establish justice, and to release all those who must be punished immediately, without any impunity. Impunity is rejected.
We took to the streets in March in search for justice for those who died, and we call for retribution, and we won't accept blood money.
The Sudanese Professionals Association, which spearheaded months of protests, has continued to call for rallies against the generals who replaced Bashir as they push for a democratic transition.
This day will be symbolic because we will achieve justice for all the martyrs and for all the missing and to all the male and female survivors from the massacre of the dispersal of the general sit-in.
Though a power-sharing deal has been signed, they have yet to agree on the exact division of powers and outline the scope of investigations into last month's violence or whether military leaders would be immune from prosecution.
Look, the families of the martyrs are present. When there is an investigative committee, it must investigate the issue from the first steps. As for us, our demands are for a civilian government. A civilian government means a government that establishes peace and justice, as well as freedom for the people.
The SPA said security forces had fired tear gas at a group marching towards the square on Thursday, though in the square itself people protested freely, continuing to call for true justice. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Meanwhile, in South Africa, the country's National Defence Forces have started patrolling the streets of Cape Town. Soldiers will join the city's police for at least 3 months. President Cyril Ramaphosa deployed the forces to bring down violence and gangs in the Cape Flats area. The murder rate in Cape Town increased 6.3% in the current year up to April 2019. Last year, over 20,000 people were murdered in South Africa. The country's police minister described the situation as close to a war zone. And for more on this, we're joined live from Cape Town by CGTN's Renee Delcam. Renee, what is the latest on the Cape Town patrols? What has been the reaction from residents?
Well, reaction from residents has been one of relief. They have been begging for the army to come in. People here live in constant fear. Their kids cannot play on the street, and they say they've had enough. They fear that the police cannot handle the gangsterism and the level of violence here in these areas. So they have been happy even to see the army come in. As you know, here in the Western Cape, the army has to be here, people say, because they can no longer take the sheer numbers. In this year alone, in Cape Town and areas around Cape Town, 1,000 people lost their lives in acts of criminality. And in the last 2 weeks, the last 2 weekends alone, we saw more than 100 people die. And right now, in this area, in a place called Mannenberg, just a few streets from here, a mother is mourning the death of her 22-year-old pregnant daughter who was caught in the crossfire between two rival gangs. So people were happy yesterday afternoon when the army finally had boots on the ground. The army also immediately got involved with a joint operation with the police. They have a battalion and other elements here on the ground, and in an operation being called Operation Prosper. And it's hoped that the army will be able to achieve trying to get people here to accept that they can be safe, to restore confidence here, and for the gangsterism to end.
100 fatalities, Renee, in just 2 weeks. That's really a huge number. So how long are these troops expected to be there?
Well, the police minister had indicated that they would be here for around 3 months. But earlier this week, the defense minister said that military intelligence would also be working closely with the police here on the ground, and that the right time to pull out the troops would be decided after a major intelligence assessment.
And have any concerns been raised about the use of troops in Cape Town? Are there any worries this could affect the city's tourism sector?
Well, although people have been begging for the army to come in, it's known that the military, they are not trained to handle law enforcement, to handle large crowds and protests, etc. So it's hoped that they will at least act as a deterrent and help the police prevent and curb the crime levels here in the Western Cape. How it will affect the tourism sector remains to be seen. Authorities here are adamant that tourism has not been seriously affected by the level of crime, but it's hard to imagine that can be true. Just earlier this week, we saw a well-known hotel called the Mount Nelson Hotel, a 5-star upmarket, well-known around the world, a strong contender for top destination in South Africa. We saw that hotel being stormed by a gang of armed robbers in a brazen armed robbery. So it's hard to believe that there won't be an impact, but just how seriously tourism will be affected will only be revealed in the next few months.
All right, Renee, thank you for that. Renee Delcam live in Cape Town. Now, the Chief of Staff of the Egyptian Armed Forces, Lieutenant General Mohammed Farid, has met with his Sudanese counterpart, Hashim Babikir, in Cairo, accompanied by a senior military delegation. The two countries share a long border, the security of which has been incentive for both nations to enhance their military cooperation, and his accompanying delegation in Cairo. Here's Adel Mahri with more.
A senior Sudanese military delegation has been here in Cairo for the 6th Joint Military Committee. The committee aims to enhance military ties between the neighboring nations.
These high-level military meetings between chief of staffs in Egypt and Sudan, it's a quite routine meetings, and they fall into that sort of coordination between the two countries when it comes to the knowledge transfer, military cooperation, and challenging the security risks.
The meetings focused on counter-terrorism efforts, border control cooperation, and future plans to curb smugglers and human traffickers. Analysts believe that Egypt is more concerned about achieving political stability in Khartoum.
It is a routine meeting, but it cannot ignore what's happening in Sudan, because the political unrest in Sudan would have repercussions, negative repercussions, if they don't control it, because the western border of Sudan is a quite hazard area, especially with the integration between the tribes in Chad and Sudan and the situation in the northwest to Libya. So I cannot say that the technical high-level meeting between the chief of staffs would ignore what's happening in Sudan.
Since President al-Bashir's ouster, Cairo has shown great confidence in Sudan's military council, giving it huge support. The government has learned from Libya that the cost of instability on its border is high. Egypt's military cooperation with Sudan aims to avoid having another troubled neighboring country. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Plans to set up a new Sidama region in Ethiopia have been postponed, a political party representing some of Ethiopia's ethnic Sidama people said on Thursday. Instead, Sidama's representatives will accept a referendum in 5 months' time. However, some of Sidama's youth activists are impatient for plans to go ahead, saying that the people's voices should be respected. The plan to declare a new region would be a direct challenge to the federal government and could encourage 8 other ethnic groups to make similar demands. The declaration would have been a test of whether Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's federal government can stick to its commitment to peaceful political reforms amid demands from competing groups. Let's turn to the ongoing tensions between the United States and Iran. The U.S. Navy claims it shot down an Iranian drone on the Straits of Hormuz. Iran's military has denied that, adding that all its drones have returned safely to their bases. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister offered to make current rigorous inspections of Iran's nuclear program permanent several years earlier than agreed if Washington lifts sanctions. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani also told French President Emmanuel Macron in a phone call that Iran is open to all options to preserve the 2015 nuclear deal. CGTN's James Spellman has more.
A U.S. Navy warship has shot down an Iranian drone in the Strait of Hormuz Thursday. U.S. President Donald Trump says the drone came within about 900 meters of the USS Boxer, an amphibious assault ship seen here earlier this week. He says the drone ignored calls to stand down.
The drone was immediately destroyed. This is the latest of many provocative and hostile actions by Iran against vessels operating in international waters.
Trump's announcement comes as Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps acknowledges it seized a foreign tanker and its 12-member crew last Sunday. Iran released this video of the seizure that shows the Panamanian-flagged Riyadh tanker, which may have connections to the United Arab Emirates. Iran says it was caught smuggling 1 million liters of oil out of Iran.
This ship, which is capable of carrying 2 million liters of fuel, was en route with 12 foreign crew to deliver the smuggled fuel received from Iranian boats to foreign ships in further regions.
The U.S. State Department is calling for immediate release of the ship and crew. Tensions have been mounting since the U.S. pulled out of the 2015 Iran nuclear accord last year. President Donald Trump wants a broader deal that extends for a longer period and addresses Iran's ballistic missile program. The U.S. is using sanctions in an attempt to force Iran to the negotiating table.
A lot of problems with the deal that was made, and we can do something quickly or we can take our time. I'm in no rush.
Tensions in the region have been rising. Last month, Iran shot down a U.S. drone, and the U.S. blames Iran for a series of tanker attacks. Iran denies involvement. The U.S. vows to keep the Strait of Hormuz open, but says it does not want a military conflict. The U.S. is also sending an additional 500 troops to be stationed in Saudi Arabia. Jim Spellman, CGTN, at the White House.
And this is Africa Live. Coming up in business. Egypt rakes in $83 million so far for hosting the Africa Cup of Nations. And South Africa's central bank cuts lending rates to boost growth.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Egypt's revenue from hosting the ongoing 2019 Africa Cup of Nations has so far reached about $83 million. That's according to the president of the Confederation of African Football, Ahmed says this year's tournament has exceeded both the 2015 edition in South Africa and in Gabon in 2017. Despite being troubled by chaos from behind the scenes as well as the baking heat, this year's event has managed to serve up some entertainment and drama in its expanded 24-team group stage. Senegal and Algeria are scheduled to secure a place in the tournament's history as they battle for the cup in the finals this Friday in Cairo.
C'est pour ça qu'on dit toujours le football africain est sous-évalué.
That is why we say that African soccer is underestimated. Today, we can say that we can go further. There has been a lot of improvement compared to the previous Africa Cup of Nations, including 2013. The turnover in South Africa was about $49 million in 2015, $52 million in 2017 in Gabon, and now $83 million here in Egypt.
The South African Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee has cut its benchmark repo rate by 25 basis points to 6.5%. This is the first time since March last year that the benchmark interest rate has been slashed. The latest move is aimed at stimulating more growth in the stagnating South African economy.
The SARB now expects growth for 2019 to average 0.6%. The forecast for 2020 and 2021 is unchanged at 1.8% and 2% respectively. The MPC assesses the risks to the growth forecast to be balanced in the near term, but remains concerned about longer-term risks. Investment prospects will continue to be limited in the absence of structural reforms. The escalation of trade tensions could have further negative impacts.
American credit rating agency Moody's says Congo's recently agreed $450 million IMF support program is a positive step for the country. The financial services company currently rates the OPEC member at CAA2. That is equivalent to the lower end of the junk grade bracket and is just above the level where a default is seen as imminent. Last week, the International Monetary Fund finalized a 3-year program with Congo. This followed an agreement struck by the government in April to restructure some $2 billion in debt to China. By 2017, following the oil crash, Congo's debt levels had ballooned to 118% of the GDP, landing the Central African oil producer into a financial crisis. Boeing will take an after-tax charge of $4.9 billion in the second quarter of this year for estimated disruptions from the grounding of its popular 737 MAX aircraft. The plane has been grounded following 2 deadly crashes that killed 346 people in a space of 5 months. The first crash was in Indonesia last October and another in Ethiopia in March this year. The charge will result in a $5.6 billion reduction in revenue and pre-tax earnings in the second quarter. The world's largest plane maker is expected to release financial results on July 24th. The Chicago-based plane maker is now reckoning with a blow to its reputation and the financial cost of getting the planes back in the air. There is no date of when the aircraft might be cleared to fly again. In less than 5 years, the wholesale price of the vanilla bean has soared by nearly 500%, making it the second most expensive spice on the planet and worth more per kilo than silver. Over the period, around 100,000 impoverished farmers in Madagascar have ridden the wave, splashing cash on motorcycles, 52-inch televisions and solar power systems. But the sweet boom has brought sour costs in an epidemic of theft, mob justice and a dramatic fall in the quality of the coveted spice. Here's Alexandria Majala with the story.
Rocketing vanilla prices bought Madagascan farmer Berlin Rannery a hot pink sofa set, a motorbike and a double-barreled shotgun to protect his crop. Thieves have stolen almost 20 kilograms out of his 200-kilogram harvest this year, part of a crime wave washing over the East African island nation of Madagascar. Competition for the highly priced beans has sparked violence between vigilante farmers and thieves and a precipitate drop in the quality of the crop.
They came in here crawling, and when they found bunches of vanilla beans like these, they tore them out of their seedlings. Then, when they saw that I was here, they ran to this side. They continued to take bunches of vanilla beans on their way. They took about 3 kilograms of vanilla, 18 bunches.
Farmers are now being forced to pick and ripe beans for fear of thieves. These beans have much lower levels of vanillin, the compound that gives the spice its aroma and acts as a natural preservative. About 2/3 of the world's vanilla is grown in northern Madagascar. Vanilla pods are so expensive partly because the flowers must be painstakingly pollinated by hand if they grow outside the native areas of South America.
We want to scare them mostly, but now the fights are too frequent. It happens 2 or 3 times a year. If thieves come to attack us while we are in our fields, we may use our weapons. But as long as it's possible to preserve lives, we will not use our weapons against them. It's better to understand why they come and steal vanilla.
The vanillin in Madagascar beans on the open market has halved to between 1.2 and 1.3%. Global demand for vanilla is so insatiable that dwindling quality has had little effect on price, although big buyers now try to avoid buying on the open market. Rannery's harvest, when blanched and sun-dried, will produce 33 kilos of black vanilla, worth around $5,700 on the local market, more than 10 times the national average income. Endemic corruption in the country makes it hard to stop inferior beans from being sold.
During police operations, when green vanilla thieves are arrested, there have been cases where the gendarmes are tempted by some rich people who give them money. It is a form of bribery that can put them in jail.
Official estimates indicate that thieves pilfered 10% of last year's harvest, and this season the numbers are projected to be worse. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Now is a better time than ever for female entrepreneurs by some measures. This year is poised to witness the rise of a record number of female-led unicorns. But as CGTN's Peninah Karibe now explains, funding for these female startups remains a challenge.
People always ask us where the idea for Away came from, and like all great business ideas, it came from a personal problem.
The co-founders of luggage company Away are the latest female entrepreneurs to join an exclusive club dominated by men. They have created a unicorn, a private company valued at $1 billion or more. Another female-founded brand that hit that mark this year is fashion retail company Rent the Runway. 2019 is on track to be a record year for unicorns founded by at least one woman. Last year, there were a record 12 of them globally. Less than half the way into this year, there were 10 of them.
According to a new report, New York City was the world's best place for female entrepreneurs to start a business until this year, when the San Francisco Bay Area snagged the top spot.
A few Chinese cities made the top 50 on the 2019 Women Entrepreneur Cities Index. Hong Kong came in at 23, Beijing at 38, and Shanghai at 47. While things appear to be looking up for female entrepreneurs, it's still an uphill battle.
I don't think the basic facts of growing a business have gotten easier, but I think a lot more women are open to the conversations and open to mentoring others to lift the next generation up. So in that sense, it might be a little bit easier.
According to data from PitchBook, startups by women in the U.S. only received around 2% of the total venture capital funding in 2018. NYU Stern Associate Professor Deepak Hegde thinks part of the problem is bias.
That and then I'm sure there are many stereotypes, right? I mean, there are stereotypes that women don't tend to take risks as much, and a large part of entrepreneurship is kind of risk-taking. Now, just because you're a risk taker does not mean you're a better founder, right? But that can unfortunately end up propagating these biases as well.
Many believe the only way to really turn things around for female entrepreneurs is to have more women making financing decisions at VC firms. Karina Huber, CGTN, New York.
Still ahead on Africa Live. Competitive arm wrestling gains popularity in Africa.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Mali's Young Arm Wrestling Federation hosted the first championship 3 years ago, and the sport is gaining traction in the North African nation. Many in Mali are getting used to the idea of this sport as something other than a way of solving childish disputes. CGTN's Mohamed Abubakar has more.
27-year-old Alpha Sogoba pumps iron every day in Badalabogu, a neighborhood in Mali's capital, Bamako.
I have loved arm wrestling since I was really young. At that time, I couldn't lift weights, but I would go to all the events wherever they were. I would mimic the athletes' actions, and then I went for it. I started lifting metal bars. I didn't touch the weight plates. When you love something, you find a way and means to get it.
Sogoba began training for a career in the sport when he was 22.
My first arm wrestle fight was not easy for me. My trainer forced me to do it. My first adversary was stronger than me. When the referee called us, I was trembling. That day, my trainer insulted me. A short while after, I grabbed my courage with both hands and won the duel. Since that day, I have the courage to go on.
His trainer Isiaka Diarra is confident he will go far.
Alpha plays a big role in our team. Every time he competes, most of the time he wins distinction in his category. He is an asset to our team.
In recent weeks, he has been preparing for the 10th African Arm Wrestling Championship. Sogoba says he is always ready to compete and makes sure he eats the right food to build his strength.
For breakfast, I usually eat beans, fried bananas. These are my specialties, and when I finish, I drink milk. I am totally on form all day long.
Even though the game is a matter of seconds, the arm wrestling championships held in Bamako's Sport Palace have managed to attract a large crowd. Mohamed Abubakar, CGTN.
Winter is a long and tough time for thousands of homeless people in South Africa who rely mostly on the work of non-governmental organizations and donations to survive the harsh temperatures. NGO MES runs 10 Days of Hope through the winter time, which gets university students to go out on the streets to help others. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
Huddled around a fire on a cold winter's night in Johannesburg, these people have nowhere to go, with very little protection from icy temperatures.
We are suffering. Some of us, we don't have homes. Some of us, we have homes. We came here, we look for a job, but we don't find. That's why we stay on the street.
But Ladla and others are not forgotten. Charity organization MES runs a student outreach program called 10 Days of Hope to make life a little bearable for him and many others.
The whole purpose of 10 Days of Hope, just to go and encourage that someone, especially people living in the street, who has lost hope, who are about to give up, and who thinks that nobody loves us. And we want to say, we still love you.
University volunteers spend part of their winter break living among the homeless, doing chores and praying for some relief for those on the streets.
There's gang rivalry. We see that young ones falling into deep traps into the inner city. So we're trying to get them out of this inner city, because once you get trapped into such a culture, you don't get out.
You can't really experience true poverty if you're not in poverty. But I definitely think it's a huge wake-up call to what really is happening, and I think everyone needs to realize that no matter how young or how old you are.
The reason why I keep on doing it over and over and why I'm enjoying it so much, the fact that they see that I actually care, and by them experiencing that, I can actually change their life. Because some people are like, I've been sitting here the entire day, nobody has even looked at me.
For 10 days, these volunteers put themselves in the shoes of the homeless and provide a warm meal for those in need. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And coming up in sports. The wait is over for Senegal and Algeria ahead of the final of the Africa Cup of Nations in Cairo.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way.
Match Point, only on CGTN.